Okay, this how-to video is going to go through the 3D DRC checks that are available inside of the Cadence PCB tools. So traditionally, you would normally do a clash detect. So you would go to kind of the 3D canvas available inside of PCB editor. And once this is loaded up, you can then run a clash detect. So you would go to the collision detection tab and then run a calculate, and it would calculate kind of clash detects from component to component. So there's now some capability available where you can actually set a constraint for these. So if we go to the constraint manager, which we can use from the icon or set up constraints, there is a 3D section. So we can now do component to component, component to board, component to ridge flex, and component to board edge. Now these all utilize a symbol classification. So if we look at the component to component, for example, we'll set up a couple of rules. We'll do a component to component and a component to board edge. Component to component, there's this symbol classification option. So if we can click in here, we can basically create symbol classification. So I've got a mechanical class, I've got an electrical class. So I can select components here with a shift click to pick the components that I want, and then pick the package I want them to go into, or the class I want them to go, and move them across. We can create a new dev class. So if we minimize that, I've got one here. Let's do one for connectors. So we'll create one, we'll call it connectors designated classification. We can give it kind of a package class if we want. These aren't edge mounted or finger mounted, so I'm going to leave them as none for now, and we'll click OK. And then I want to effectively select the objects and just move them into that class, and then that stores the component classes. Once I've got that, I then need to create a rule. So I can do an add row, and I can either do component to component and just do individual checking, or I can say, let's look at maybe all of my electrical parts to let's set up all three classes here, so we can select all the different classes, and then we'll get a different set of rules. So we can see I've got a rule from electrical parts to either the connectors, the electrical parts themselves, or to the mechanical parts, and I can specify a specific clearance. I'm just going to leave those as 0 for now. So if we then, once we've got the rule, we then apply the rule. So I'm going to apply the rule of clearance. And then we need to make sure that the DRCs are enabled. So if we go to Analyze and Analysis modes, we can have a look here. There's the 3-dimensional components. So you can see here, we can either make sure the constraints are on. While I'm here, let me just give you a quick tip. There's a really useful information button here that will actually give you default on what the different DRC rule actually does. This is available for all the constraint modes, so it's worthwhile having a look at these if you're unsure which DRC checks does what. And you get a good indication. So we can see we've got our rules on, so we'll click OK, just minimize constraint manager. And if we update our DRC, we've got an error. Okay, that's good. So we can actually see I've got a DRC marker in the 2D canvas. If we go to the 3D canvas, there's a choice of the 3D canvas, the 3DX canvas, or the traditional 3D canvas. Let's show the 3DX canvas. And we have it here. And if we zoom in, we can actually see the DRC. So I can physically see that I've been a bit slack with my placement of this LED, and it's actually clashing. So I could move the component and clear the DRC error. So the next part of this check is, let's go back to Constraint Manager again. And if we look at maybe a component to board edge. So again, I want to create a row. So I'm going to do, let's look at all of my electrical parts, and we'll click OK. And what sort of clearance do I want to the board edge? And you can use either the 3D step model that's associated with the part, the place bound that's associated with the part, or the VFA boundary that's associated with the part. So I'm going to choose the 3D step model. Maybe let's just set a value here of 2 millimeters. Once I've created the rule, I then need to apply the rule. So I'm just going to come into here and we'll just pick the rule that I've created, board edge. That's fine. So we've got a board edge here, electrical parts. That's all okay. So we can close this and then do an update DRC. And I've got 19 errors now, and you can start to see, obviously, I've got a little DRC marker here. If I hover over the DRC error as normal, so then my rule is 2 millimeters. My actual value is 1.847 there. So I'd need to kind of either adjust my rule or move this component.